Yes, everyone, and welcome back to the Irish Hotspur podcast, the Tottenham Weekly podcast. And filling in for Dave this time is Michael. Dave has gone missing for this one, and so we've kind of gone through the youth academy of the Harris Army, and we picked out Michael here to step in. And we know Michael loves to have a say on his Spurs, and definitely has some strong opinions, which is exactly what we're looking for in this podcast. And as people know, it's really just a sort of pre-recorded kind of chat between two guys where we really just chat about really whatever we want to talk about with Spurs. It's not really like chatting about what game just happened or what sort of, current news is out there. It's really actually an opportunity for me, Michael, as well as Dave, and I guess now in your case, to really chat about things that maybe you don't really get to get stuck
Yeah.
into as much as you like, or things that maybe escape the airwaves, let's say, don't really get as much light, or perhaps you haven't even had the opportunity to have your say on with somebody. But Michael, good to have you. Thanks for filling in for Dave today.
Yeah, no worries, Jacko. I'm always pumped to talk with you guys, and I'm too talkative sometimes for just the fan shows, and sometimes 15 minutes is not enough for me. So I guess
Definitely
the
not.
podcast format is the best here,
We found the
right?
right
And
place.
yeah, the hot prospect from Youth Academy, even all I whipped up the shirt today, so yeah, I'm ready. Let's
We'll
let's
get you
bring
a
it.
flat cap next time because that's what you need for their his Army Academy. But
Oh
looking good
yeah,
with that kid on, looking good with that kid on, my friend. But let's get into it, everybody. If you are watching this on YouTube, do smash that like button. If you're listening on the podcast platforms, enough chatting from me about all that stuff. We'll get straight into it. Skepticism towards Romero is kind of where I want to start today. A good little warm up. I don't even know how long I really have to say because I kind of understand where the anger towards Romero is coming from, where the skepticism is coming from. I feel like he hasn't made it too easy on himself, hasn't exactly sort of stayed away from, let's say, the pressure or the limelight when it comes to this sort of kind of theory that he has been holding himself out for the World Cup. Where I sort of stand on it, though, then maybe something that I think has maybe gone missed, Michael, is that Romero is playing for basically the team with the most pressure going into the World
yeah,
Cup. And a lot of people maybe aren't appreciating that sort of scenario where it is Messi's last World Cup. This Argentina FA has been absolutely ruthless for like a year and a half when it comes to their player recruitment. And any player, they don't care if they're injured, they don't care. Whatever it may be, they will call you up to that plane. And if you say no, I don't think it goes too well with them. It's not something that they really take too kindly. In fact, I'm pretty sure they would be happily replace you with somebody else because it really is one of those FAs or one of those teams that there'd be someone else happy to take your spot
yeah,
on
yeah,
that plane. And even if it means, like, and this is what I'm about to get to, the Argentina FA on multiple occasions, if I'm not mistaken, basically made it very clear that they did not want their players risked or really played too much towards the end of this kind of mid-season, basically the last few games of the World Cup. They did not really want any players risked or even played really at all. Ideally for them, they actually, I believe, made that clear to the media. They made that clear to various clubs and whatnot, and they basically said to their own players that they didn't want them risking themselves towards the World Cup. If you find yourself in that situation, Michael, I think that's almost like an abuse of power by the Argentina FA. And I don't really feel like I'm going to be too angry at Romero. I think where the anger should be directed, this is my point, should be directed towards the Argentina FA and the way they put pressure on their players to make these sort of decisions, or even just to make it look like they are preferring the Argentina team when it's probably not the case. They do put pressure on their players though to make them want to prefer the Argentina FA instead, or prefer the Argentina national team. And when you find yourself in that scenario, Michael, where somebody is basically directly telling you to choose them over someone else, it's not an easy
yeah.
situation to find yourself in. So I actually feel for Romero more than maybe the other Spurs fan might, which I see and I understand where the skepticism comes from. I sort of actually weirdly feel for Romero, and I'm actually, my anger, I think, should be directed towards maybe more that Argentina call up and all that pressure surrounding that team.
Yeah, I have to agree with you about the Argentina FA. That we have a lot of like bad memories with them, even concerning Lo Celso. Whenever
Right.
Lo Celso was hitting form, there was an international break, and he always got injured on one. So it's, but I never I never doubt players in terms of like their love for the club or whatever. When it comes to representing their country, like for most players, it will most likely be country over club.
Sure.
And I know it sounds bad when you support your club and you want your players to perform the best for your club, right? But as you said, first of all, Romero is part of the squad that is one of the favorites to win the World Cup, right? And like if you look at Argentina and all the narratives surrounding them, right? It all fits together, right? I even heard somewhere that if Argentina reach the final, it will be 1,000th game of Messi, 1,000th
Wow.
professional game of his, right? So
Wow.
imagine if you won the World Cup at his 1,000th game, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
And they're also an undefeated team or something like that, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken right
you
now.
know,
So
also it concerns me because I think that they are undefeated in somewhat like 42 games, and I think the
yeah.
record is 45, which means, and they play Poland, my Poland, at the last game of
Oh
the
no.
group stages. So if they win against us, they will break the record. So,
Oh
uh,
no.
that there is a lot there. But yeah, in terms of Romero, uh, I understand why people may be a bit pissed off with what happened
Yeah,
around
me
him,
too.
right?
Mhm.
Because like don't see him at the stadium watching the games, right? And then immediately like 2 days after you see him training with his national team, then some people might think that he was faking it or something. I also want to raise the concern that if you ever got something in your legs injured, right? My father got his knee done while
Yeah.
playing football, right? And even though he had an operation, and like
Still never
maybe
was the same.
yeah,
Yeah.
a week or two after, he was able to walk, not to run but to walk, basically, right? Even though he was able to walk, he wasn't like at his best. He couldn't run. He had to
Mm.
be careful when even walking up and down the stairs, right? So
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
not like you can have an operation and immediately go back to training, immediately go back to playing, right? You had to be eased in. And where I think that maybe perhaps Romero could play against Leeds or whatever, there was no point in risking him.
Mhm.
And I think that, like, from management point of view, from Conte's point of view, I feel like I would much rather allow Romero to not play against Leeds to make him happier, to allow him to
Yeah.
represent his country, which, let's be honest, as I said, is a dream of many players, and especially
For
of
that
South
team in
America,
particular.
yeah,
Yeah.
and South Americans in general, right? Like, you could even like, another example would be, if you remember the match against United and Chelsea, Varane got injured, right? And he is a grown man, like, five
Yeah.
Champions Leagues on
And
his
yeah.
account, and he was absolutely crying his eyes out, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we shouldn't like overreact with it, because I've seen some like reactions of certain people saying that that Romero is a traitor or whatever, and the people start turning on him. I think that's a gross overreaction, and I think that we should,
Mm.
like, maybe be
Maybe what I'm trying to
more
say, Michael, is
understanding.
that maybe that sort of anger is okay. I think I feel that Spurs fans are angry about it because they want to see Romero play. But maybe my point is that perhaps that anger that they might have towards Romero might be better directed. The real person they should be throwing it at is perhaps, I think, this Argentina FA that puts these pressure on these players and also makes it uncomfortable for guys like Romero to make that decision. Also, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Romero playing through a few injuries already this season?
Yeah, like, I think he played after the recent international break, the one in September. I think he had some sort of an
Mhm.
injury there. He
Yeah.
played for his country, then he played for us and got injured again, right? So, as I said, I from like Tottenham point of view, I would much rather have a happy and fit Romero after the World Cup, instead of overplaying him and making him injured again, because
Yeah.
reoccurring injuries are usually even more dangerous than the previous ones. If you
You're
injure
right.
the place that already was injured, then
You're
usually
right.
it doesn't bode well for the player, right? So yeah, as I said, I would much rather have him fit. And I also, like, I mentioned it to you when we were talking earlier about Son, and some people turn on Son, like,
Mhm.
accuse him of also downplaying it because they saw him in training against Korea, for Korea, right? Like, he had he had a
His
concussion
face was
protocol. Yeah,
broken.
like, yeah, his face was broken. That's first thing, right? But just by the rule of FA, he couldn't play in the games because of the concussion protocol.
Mm,
And also, like his injury is different. He can train, right? There is nothing wrong with his legs or his, any of his muscles. It's just that he broke some bones in his face, so he can play with a protective mask, right?
yeah.
So,
And you're
yeah,
right on that concussion part.
yeah,
It
yeah,
yeah, absolutely right. Just seems to all stem from, yeah, we haven't been going through a good time with the results and whatnot. So I think we all are just sort of
yeah,
thinking we need our best players back. And when they seem like they're capable of playing, I understand where the skepticism comes from. But there you are, everybody. Those are our thoughts on the Romero sort of situation. Michael wanted to talk about this, and I'm glad that he did because we were probably going to skip past this entirely, which would have been a mistake of mine. Players of the season so far, best and worst, is what Michael wants to discuss here. So, Michael, I might let you go first. Would you rather start with the best or start with the worst?
you know, sorry, I think it's easier to start with the better ones, right? Because like you can clearly see which players were overperforming, not
Mm,
overperforming as they were better than they usually are, but who actually performed well and upped
sure.
their standards when the other players were failing to do so, right? I think that there are
Let's start
some
with the best.
obvious, yeah,
Yeah.
there are some obvious surnames that we should list. I think that first of all, like Betancourt and Højbjerg, we all sing praises about them, right? And I do sometimes understand when people say that maybe they aren't like the most flavorful, silky
Yeah.
players, right? But what they are solid midfielders who are workhorses, who have incredible stamina, who perform like on the same level each game, right?
Yeah.
So they maybe won't drop a 10 or rarely drop a 10,
Yeah.
right? But they will perform at that like six,
Six,
seven,
seven,
8,
consistently.
that consistent level. So I think that they deserve a highlight. Then I think that Kane deserves a highlight. But the situation with Kane is kind of strange
Yeah, it is
because
strange.
I think that because of how good he can be, we raise the standard for him so high that
True.
even if he scores a goal and assists one or whatever, right? But he isn't like running the game by himself. We don't feel that he is doing well. But
Mm,
if you look at it from different perspective, he scored like 12 goals already in 15 matches in Premier
yeah.
League,
Yeah.
which if the Norwegian midfield or whatever with the
If he just
nickname
didn't
is
exist,
for
yeah.
Haaland, yeah, if he didn't exist, Kane would be leading the top scorer chart and by a few goals already, right?
Is he
So
flying under the radar then, kinda Harry Kane with that because of it? Some people have sort of said that, like, Kane is secretly actually having a very good season, and he's not even really playing yet at his
yeah,
full best because he's been without Sonny, he's been without Kulusevski, he's basically just been a lone man up top in a lot of games, and secretly, he's still having, I think, one of his best seasons. Is he flying under the radar, do you think a little bit, Michael?
yeah. I think that he's like three goals away from his previous season tally in the whole season, right? And he
Mhm.
only played 15 games so far. So I think that this might be one of the best scoring Kane seasons. But the problem is that maybe the highlight won't be on him because of Haaland. So what I want from Kane is to him for him to reach the level that he had last season, right? If he played like that throughout that part of the season, I think that we would have been better. But I also feel for him because like he's the player with the most minutes played out of all of the squad, right? He played more than Højbjerg, more than Dyer, more than Bentancur. Sorry. So I think that he was really overplayed during that period, and I hope that after we come back, there will be like most often one game per week. Some weeks there will be two, but I think that he will be able to manage himself better, and we as a team will be able to manage him better, right? That I think that actually we will see Kane shine
Yeah.
because, like, if you think about it, if he already scored 12 in 15 being overplayed, tired, and
And also without a lot of support either, I
yeah,
think.
without much support, right? Then think what could happen if he actually was rested and he had
Yeah,
playmakers around him, right?
totally true.
So
I
yeah,
completely agree. Can
I
we Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
on,
go
go
on,
on.
Jacko. So
Okay.
I think that those are the three names that should be highlighted as top performers
Yeah.
in our team. And I also have to mention Kulusevski, but the problem with him was that he was injured for, I think, 10 games he missed. So it's hard for me to put him in the bracket with like the best players just because he was missing
It's almost
for
like the ghost of Kulusevski is where we really, like, show the praise, and, apologies for
yeah.
the noise behind me. There's a bit of a furnace, and it's heating up, and it's the
Uh,
winter time, and, I know it's getting cold in Poland too, so it's nice to see that these
yeah,
bedrooms are
it's
getting a little
freezing.
warmer
It's
these
freezing.
days. But, Kulusevski, I think it was the ghost of him that we were really missing, right? Is the fact that we knew that we would be such a better team the moment he comes back, and we were missing him for so long. The moment he comes back, we see how brilliant we looked. In fact, it sort of did show when we were being accused of being a boring, let's say, negative type team. The moment a guy like Kulusevski comes back, I feel like all those sort of accusations kind of were not so, I didn't really, let's say, hold as much water by the looks of it. Because when you are really without all of your main strikers, all of your main players up front, I think we do have to look at the position that Conte found himself in. But players of the season so far, you mentioned Bentancur and Højbjerg. For me, with I think Bentancur, everybody loves Bentancur before. I think they all knew that, like you said, in fact, he is actually, I think, one of the silky, stylish sort of midfielders there. But he didn't ever really in his whole career ever match it with goals or assists or really venture that far forward or anything. He's always just been a bit of a kind of a grafter of a midfielder that's just very beautiful to watch on the ball, so composed and everything. Even during his days at Juventus, though, it's just not really that much of a goal scoring midfielder, more of a guy that you did have is kind of, I hate to say it, he was a bit of a Højbjerg actually for Juventus, in
True
fact,
that.
back in the day. What's also funny though is a lot of people didn't seem to know a lot about Bentancur, maybe because he was a bit of a Højbjerg for the likes of a Juventus. He wasn't a goal scoring midfielder for them. He wasn't the first player you thought of on that Juventus team. But I think we did forget he's been playing, I think, Champions League football, high level football
Yeah,
since like
for a few years already.
2017, 2018, or whatever it's been. Like, I think if I even looked at his FB ref, I would imagine that there would just be 1,000 different tabs of like all of his
Yeah,
days
yeah,
in the Serie A and during the Champions League. If not, this he probably has more Champions League experience than I think even the rest of this team. Like, to be fair, like maybe other than Perisic, he might have some of the most Champions League experience during his days at Juventus. It's nice to see that Antonio Conte has turned him into basically just a better midfielder than he originally was. I
yeah,
think you're still seeing the original Bentancur in there, that guy that can get stuck in, that guy that has that grit, that nastiness about him. But he's also allowing him to maybe express himself a bit more, maybe than he was allowed to, perhaps, in a Juventus side. So it's nice to see Bentancur, I think, sort of maybe come into his own because I must be honest, he wasn't really a midfielder that a lot of people showed a lot of appreciation for, I think, when he was over at Juventus. In fact, a lot of people, even Spurs fans, didn't even know who the hell he was
yeah. Neither did I.
when he came
I'm
here.
gonna be honest. I didn't know who he was before he came.
Yeah, and
Uh,
so he's sort of been a player that I think has played at a very high level and has actually flown under the radar maybe for some time, has now been able to come into the Spurs side and get the appreciation maybe he deserves just as a good footballer. Højbjerg, though, has always, I think, been met with, I think, skepticism. People think we always can do better than Højbjerg, etc. A lot of people just basically haven't been Højbjerg's best fan. I think, in fact, each season, I think he's made a separate statement. In fact, I think Højbjerg
yeah,
has a very funny sort of story arc almost with Spurs, where the season he was brought in under Jose, the reason was very clear why he was brought. There was no one else in the midfield that wanted to win a tackle. There was no one else that wanted to do all the dirty work. They all wanted to be basically the stylish, the Lo Celsos, the Tangis, the Deli Alis. There was no, or Harry Winks even too. There was nobody that wanted to win a tackle in the team. He brings in a Højbjerg. Højbjerg actually that season under Jose for me
he
was
was
actually one of
magnificent.
the best players of that season, I think, alone. In fact, if we didn't have Højbjerg that season under Jose, I mean, where would we have been? We would
I
have been in the mid-table, nowhere near could have finished in a Europa League spot, Europa Conference League spot. I mean, it was just he saved our season on multiple occasions. Then you look at, think, the following season where it was a rough season, and he was sort of just
Yeah,
the
it
gel. I
was.
think he was the gel that was, like, keeping us again from being, like, kind of embarrassed further. I think if Nuno didn't have Højbjerg, we would have been embarrassed a whole lot more in certain games, especially because I think even one of those games, remember, Nuno decided to just throw Tanguy and Dele all the way forward and just leave Højbjerg by himself. Imagine if that was Winks. Imagine if we didn't have a Højbjerg
Yeah,
there and
like
that was just Winks instead. I mean, that Arsenal North London derby, instead of a 3-1, would have been a 6-1, a 7-1.
yeah, or an
And then you look
embarrassing
at how
result,
he
right?
transformed under Conte. Towards I think the end of the Conte first season, towards the end of that season, he was basically the best of the midfielders. He was one of our best players toward the end of the last season. He was playing dimes all over the place. He was threading the midfield. He was just being such a better player than maybe people gave him credit for. And now this season, I think he's carried that form from the last bit
Last season.
of
Yeah,
the end of last season into now. And I think now he's finally getting the appreciation he deserves. In fact, I do sort of laugh it off now when people still kind of just shuck aside Højbjerg and don't really think he's all that, because I think it's almost reached a stage where if you don't really see how much this guy has improved under Spurs, and if you haven't seen how much he does do for this team, I don't know if you ever will really. But I don't
yeah.
know, Michael. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe with Højbjerg, and then we'll go on to the worst players.
Yeah, I think that, and I think we spoke about it once. When your team is not doing great in the match, right? The place that you most likely focus on when you think that the errors are is midfield, right?
Yeah,
Because if your attacking play isn't going well, you usually blame the midfield because they
yeah,
cannot transition the ball from the defense to attack, right? If you are conceding goals, then it's usually because like the opposition attack started through the midfield, right? And I think that whereas I don't think that Højbjerg is a perfect player, far from that, right? I think that he has his flaws, and you know that but what I think he is, as I said, he's a solid player, and I think that he has been scapegoated plenty of times when he was playing for us, right? And the team was doing bad, and like you mentioned the
yeah.
Mourinho team, right? When he was brought in to be the man to put in put in the head where nobody wanted to put the leg in, right?
Right.
And basically I think that he protected that defense even under Mourinho, which was like 3 years
Which was
ago.
a moon boots
Yeah,
defense
because
as well.
like
Yeah.
if you remember, we were like the pinnacle counter-attacking team under Mourinho, right? It was
Hmm.
just score 1, 2 goals in the first half and shut the shop up. 11
Yeah.
men behind the ball, and and the bus in the goal, and
Right. Right.
it was all done, right? And I think that he was crucial to that style of play because he actually allowed us
He
to
allowed us to
like
play that way.
invite pressure onto our defense because he was so solid in his defensive duties.
Yeah.
And
But more's
I
been asked of him over each season now, right?
yeah,
Right, that
yeah,
was his sole job, it felt like, under Jose. People maybe only saw him as that type of player under Jose. You go to the next season under Nuno/Conte, he's being asked to do a whole lot more, Michael, and I think Højbjerg has stepped up in being asked to do a whole lot more. In fact, I think we find ourselves now where a lot of people written him off, kind of thinking, like, he's really only this type of player, he can
yeah,
only
yeah.
really do this. We find ourselves now where we're like, he's only what, 27 years old, 26 years old or something like that. We think he's shown so much improvement over this, span of time, that who's to say he's not going to continue to get better, in fact.
Yeah, like I think that when I was thinking about our team and where improvements should come, like in January, in next summer, right? I don't think that midfield is even close to our issue, right? I
Hmm.
think that the profile of players that we have in the midfield, defensively
Are the ones
and
Conte wants.
transition wise, are exactly what Conte wants. He wants workhorses, solid players that he can rely on, right? And I think that Højbjerg and Bentancur and even Bissouma are
Yeah,
exactly
and
what he
Bissima.
needs, right? And by the way, speaking of Højbjerg, also, I don't know if you remember when we got Bentancur last winter, right? There were plenty of people calling out for Højbjerg to be dropped for Skip and to see Skip and Bentancur play, right?
Right,
And
right.
when that happened, and I think he got dropped for the Wolves game,
It was,
that we lost.
Bentancur and Winks, I believe,
Yeah,
what ended up
it was
being the
back then it was Bentancur and Winks, right? But I think that he got dropped for this game. He
Yeah,
came back and he was solid for the rest of the season. Not a single bad performance from him, right?
yeah.
Maybe the United away game that we
He
lost
does well
3-2,
with
right?
pressure. He does well with competition, I think, Hoiberg, too. Like, he's not a guy that mopes about it. In fact, he takes it to another level. When he got Bentancur, took it to another level. When Basuma came in, everybody thought Basuma was going to step in straight away
Yeah,
for Hoiberg.
it
He
was
took it to
immediately
another
it is
level.
going to it is going to be Bissouma and Bentancur. Højbjerg needs to be dropped. What Højbjerg does, he proves to us again that he is a solid and reliable player,
And
right?
he's hit it with goals this season too. And in fact, I think he scored some of the goals of the season. In
Yeah, so
fact, I think some
especially
fantastic
offense wise.
finishes as well.
Yeah.
He shows how technically brilliant he is. We got to get stuck into some of the worst players of the season so far, though. Quickly, Michael. Um, I think there's an obvious one here. I think he started out great. He had a lot of backers, sort of actually shown that maybe this is a new season. He's turning a new leaf yet again. Scored in that Southampton game, very crucial goal. Kind of had some good games, maybe some sketchy ones here and there, but for the most part, let's just say he was kind of solid. Then he
Yeah.
gets that England call up to the likes of that Southgate squad. October, November comes, which I like to think is his lunar moonhead cycle, where everything just goes out the door. Eric Dyer, I think, had gone from being one of the probably like the more solid players of the season, Michael. Then comes October and that November time period. The man becomes, I think, the single handedly the worst player in the whole 11. In fact, I think he's dropped below Lloris in certain, games and performances. I think Lloris is also maybe one of the worst players actually quickly of this season so far, which is just sad to say. But for me,
Yeah,
it's
it's
Eric
tough.
Dyer, Emerson, Lloris, maybe two more I could get stuck into that I'm not thinking of, but I mean Eric Dyer and Lloris I think are the main
I,
ones that we need to talk about. Yeah.
I think it might be a bit controversial, but I would throw Sessegnon into that.
Yes, Sessegnon, please. Yeah,
I I, I
too. Yeah.
think I think he's been well. The thing with Sessegnon is that when he had a brilliant season in Fulham right before we brought him in, then we brought him in. We deemed that he wasn't good enough for our starting 11 or to play for us. We loaned him to Hoffenheim. I think
Mhm.
he performed kind of well as far as I remember in Hoffenheim. He came back, and I just think that because of his injuries, there is no confidence left in him,
Mm.
and
It's
the
almost his body has changed as well. Like he's bulked up a lot. I've noticed, right? He's a lot bigger of a guy, but he moves a lot clunkier. I think
yeah,
now he just
I
moves so
think
clunky.
I think he just doesn't trust his body anymore,
Mm.
and
That's
if you
sad.
play
Yeah.
with if you play, yeah,
It's a sad
as
place to be in
yeah,
in that
as you
case. Yeah.
said, the thing with Sessegnon is not that I'm pissed off with him that he isn't good enough or whatever, right? I think it's kind of sad because I think there was potential there, but I just think that the, either somehow he returns to that form that he had somehow, but how many chances can you give the guy, right? Or
Mm.
we have to move on, in my opinion, because
Well, he has a
I
clock
think,
on him though because Udogi is coming through the door
yeah,
next season.
exactly, right. And Tudogi is performing out of his skin in Udinese, right? So I think that what I think that it would be also like a good sign of maybe the mentality of the club changing if we actually sold him. Because if you look at like players like Dyer or Davies, I think that also the seasons that they should probably be moved on happened a few years ago, but they
Mm,
are still there because for some reason we are reluctant to get rid of them, right? And I think that we should honestly move on from Sessegnon,
mm,
or maybe he finds his form, but I doubt it because, as I said, how many chances can we give the guy? And I think that
yeah.
that's regarding Sessegnon, right? I think you said about comparing Dyer and Loris, who was the worst performer, right? I think the problem is that Loris, he sometimes drops a stinker like he did against Newcastle or
Yeah.
Arsenal, right? But I think that he also has some unbelievable performances, right? I think that even though we
As a
lost
goalkeeper,
his
though, is
performance
that
in this
where
game.
it just feels like it's the worst position to be that type of player, right? To
Yeah,
just have
but
a you would almost rather him be a Højbjerg or a Bentancur, what we spoke about earlier, where it's like you just get guaranteed no mistakes, no big errors or anything from those guys. Sort of boring, right? Is even what they've been labeled as by some people. I sort of wish Hugo was the same. I instead of maybe 1,000 worldy saves met with 1,000 clangers, I'd rather it just be sort of somewhere in the middle, maybe Michael. Especially this season, it feels like we're getting more clangers than
yeah,
we
yeah.
are spectacular saves.
I don't want to defend Loris. I think that we should look for a replacement in the summer. I don't think that we need to look for a replacement this winter because I think that if we somehow improve this defense, I think Loris is good enough for that half of year
Mm,
span that we will manage with Loris in goal, right? Because I also think that he is one of those players that when you put a lot of pressure on him, he starts making mistakes. That's obvious. Like all players make mistakes when they are under pressure. But I think that he's especially susceptible to that. And I think that Dyer and Sanchez are also susceptible. So imagine if you have a goalkeeper who isn't really like confident when put under pressure, and you put
yeah,
two bums in front of him,
yeah,
and he not only has to worry about himself but also worry about them. I think that that's an issue, and I think that if we had a solid center backs, solid three center backs in front of him, I think that he would perform better. Whereas, and the reason I'm saying all of this about Loris is that I want to
yeah.
put Dyer as the worst player of the season so
It's
far,
not Lloris
and
alone, and in
yeah,
fact, I
it's
agree with you. Lloris and his distribution is shocking, but it actually has been made to look worse because of some of the passes that he receives from Eric
yeah,
Dyer
like
or a Sanchez or whatever it may be. There have been times when he's been given a back pass that's like, geez, like what do you expect him to do with that sort of
yeah,
scenario?
five
And also,
meters away from him, he has to run to it,
they
right?
also never
When
show for it after they also give it to him, what I've noticed. A lot of center backs
yeah,
who actually are confident on the ball, they'll give it to the keeper, but then immediately show for it again. And what it seems they do is they give it to Lloris and then they kind of just turn their head, expecting him to just like find somebody out there, and
yeah,
then he
or
doesn't.
they just hide behind someone, right, and expect miracles to happen, right?
Spot on.
But yeah,
But
like maybe we
best
should
and
move on
worst,
to
though, I think so. For maybe to summarize, Hugo, I think has to be thrown in there. Eric Dyer, we'll talk about it, I think, on plenty of occasions. But Michael, I think you will agree with me. Was he sort of solid and probably nowhere near the worst player list until October? And then just
yeah,
in the span of a month, he's basically played himself into being one of the worst, would you say, at the
yeah.
moment in
I
time?
think for the first like 6 games, I think 6 or 7 games, he was actually okay. I think
Yeah.
there were some errors, but they weren't like so obvious and so bad. I
Yeah.
think that there was like in Chelsea game there was a slight error when he as the center back moved the defense to the right too far when Rhys James scored. And I
Yes.
think that in game against West Ham he had an error as far as I remember, but those weren't as bad as from in the second like part of that season after the England call up, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, I think
I
there
think
was
yeah, so
yeah,
Dyer gets thrown in there. Sanchez, yes, but like I think we all knew it. Like we all knew that was going to be
yeah,
the case.
it's no surprise,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Another thing I would say is we've mentioned this before on shows, but maybe this hasn't been mentioned with the podcast is that Sanchez is actually, strangely enough, one of the few players that hasn't improved under Antonio Conte. We've seen almost every player show signs of improvement under Conte and see their, in some cases, like Ben Davies, their career has almost been repaired, if not
Yeah.
saved. Like but he's had his career, I think, saved at Spurs by Antonio Conte. Dyer, similar to a degree. Sanchez, I think, is the only guy that hasn't
Yeah,
shown any
I
improvement
think
under
I think
Conte.
it's done.
So
I think that he has to go. Like,
yeah, and we'll talk about that, I think, quickly with or not quickly, we'll talk about that with the cleaning, of
yeah,
Paratici. Emerson, I'll throw in there too. Of course, this comes from somebody who likes to stick up for the guy because I personally think that Doherty and Emerson are both dreadful and they both aren't good enough, but
it's so bad.
I refuse to believe Doherty is that much better than
He's
Emerson that
not.
people like to think that he is. But I will admit right now, I think Emerson has also sort of played himself out of form a lot. I think he was showing some really good performances. I think Newcastle was one where I thought he was actually brilliant against Newcastle in that defeat, was one of the better players on the pitch. And then he's had some bad moments this season. He's had the North London Derby red card. I think that was
Oh,
also
don't
really
even
blown out of
remind me of that.
proportion. I think that was really blown out of proportion, though, because you then see 1,000 different challenges that weekend, which were the exact same in the exact same scenario. And of course, Emerson gets the red, but that is who he is. He is the guy that sort of has a target on his back, I think. And people will sort of, punish him for those. And he doesn't make it easy on himself, is maybe what I'm trying to say. He had some moments of just pure, just lunacy where he's either hitting it out of play from across,
Yeah.
no look passes, etc. Bicycle kicks that still haven't hit, that have gone into orbit, etc. And I think what's sad about Emerson is that in some of those games where he even did those things, I actually think there were some moments in that game where he did either runs or passes or defensive moments that were completely overlooked, completely overshadowed, that Doherty most certainly would not have been able to do. But this is the thing with Emerson. He'll do something pretty great and then he'll match it up with something like that right
Yeah.
afterwards. And I think that's where I'm trying to get to, is that he doesn't make it easy on himself. He doesn't really make it, a convincing case for you to really stick up for him. I totally see why people are done with him. I feel like he's sort of also joined the worst list as well. In fact, also kind of maybe he has reached a stage of point of no return, I think, with Spurs fans, Emerson, because of also some of the bad performances he's put in, I think, himself too. And while I'd like to say some of the bad performances were blown out of proportion, still bad performances from him. And I think
Yeah.
he still joins that list. Sessegnon, like you said, too. Are we missing anybody else?
I
Maybe some people want to throw in, I don't know, like a Richarlison, but I think that's too harsh. I
I'm
don't
a bit
know.
on the fence with Richie,
But no,
but
just quickly, anybody just that maybe we're missing before we move on? What would you say? Anybody we're missing for the
I
list?
think I guess you could throw in Doherty to that
He
bunch,
just hasn't played as much
but
as
yeah,
nearly
he
as
just hasn't
Emerson.
played much. I think there are some players that maybe didn't show anything good, and
That's true.
and actually they were part of the squad that lost some match, and we actually think that they were bad. It's
Hmm.
just that that they really didn't get
Hmm.
much chance, so it's hard to blame them for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I'm
So
with you.
yeah,
I'm with you there. This is a topic I want to bring up, Michael, that I want to get kind of discuss, and it's a continued sort of annoyance of mine, where I feel for Paratici. Um, I think he still has so much cleaning to do. We talk about
yeah,
how much Paratici loves to cook. He loves to cook the books. He loves to cook the transfers, all that sort of stuff. But I think he's continued to have to clean while cooking at the same time. And I think January, again, has been a situation where it's not made any easier for him. Let me kind of maybe make it clear here, where he finds himself with Tanganga and Sanchez that Conte most certainly does not trust and
yeah,
will want to get rid of. Certain Eric Dyer, I don't think he'll move on in January, but let's be honest too, like,
not
has
yet.
played himself so out of form that Eric Dyer is almost a problem at this stage. Harry Winks, who hasn't gotten a single minute out in Italy, I believe is returning to Tottenham Hotspur. So
Already? Oh,
yeah, he's
Jesus.
returning. Yeah, I
Oh,
think they're cutting the loan, just not gonna just not alone basically anymore. I think they've just decided to, or they will, because he decided to get the surgery, which means Sampdoria will probably cancel the loan because that's
yeah,
what they
most
didn't
likely.
want him to do. And he decided to go out and do it. So he has to deal with Winks again, poor guy. Jed Spence, Doherty, or Emerson, he has to get rid of in order to bring in a right wing back. You also look at the replacement or the backup for Kulusevski. He has to bring in the likes of a Lucas Mora. I think hasn't really shown much. He's going to have to maybe move him on in January, or I think Lucas is just going to leave at the end of the season. Brian Hill, he's going to have to move on in January. Papa Matasar, he might have to move on in January. It's just so much on this guy's plate that I think we don't realize when it comes to the cleaning. Of course, he has to bring in a center back. Of course, he has to bring in a right wing back. And I think he needs to bring in some wingers too, Michael. But it's not easy when you have to also have two center backs that are completely useless to you. Like, you can't bring in two center backs. If you already have two, you need to get rid of. It's already hard to bring in a fourth right wing back when you have three that you don't even want to use. I think he finds himself, Paratici in a situation where he has to clean up a lot of the sludge and the grease on the grills,
Yeah.
essentially, before he can even do any cooking again. And I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, I think that, you know,
And these aren't all
he
his signings, just quickly. These aren't his signings. Like the
yeah,
Jet
most
Spence
of
is
the
a
managed,
Levy
right?
signing. Jet Spence is a Levy signing. Sure, Emerson is his, but Doherty is then you could, equal it out. Doherty is a Hitchin signing.
Yeah.
The likes of Sanchez Hitchin, likes of Tanganga brought up through the academy. Then it's Dyer, etc. Like most of these guys are not even Paratici signings that he's getting rid of. He's not getting rid of his own signings. He's getting rid of previous signings still from previous, decades. But yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Michael.
like I think that his working place is so, it's so tough, the job that he has to do, because like all the things that you mentioned are true, right? He has to get rid of the players from previous systems. He has to bring new players, right? He has to, and also he's working with one of the stingiest chairmen in the Premier League. And whereas I think that at least maybe, because of course I don't
Yeah.
know for certain, right? But I think that our club and our like management actually wants to support him and Conte. Like the vibes that I get from what Conte is saying in the presser, what the journals are saying, right? I know that we cannot like believe them like
Mhm.
fully, right? The journals, they are guessing too, right? But I think that his job is massive, and like a lot of people give him stick for what he brought in the windows that he was here. But I think there is an underappreciation for what for which players he got rid of. And actually, to support my argument, I have on the second screen the squad from the 4-2 win against Leicester, the one at the end of the season when Mason was in charge, when Bale was here, before
Yeah.
Paratici came, right? And the squad was Kane, Son, Ali gone, Bergwijn gone, Wings hopefully gone,
Trying
Reguilon
to get
gone.
rid of.
Yeah, they're
But yeah.
trying to get rid of Region, trying to get rid of Alderweireld, Sanchez, Doherty, Lloris, who we
Yeah.
will change, right? Eric Lamela, Joe Hart, Joe Rodon, Eric
Wow.
Dyer, Lucas Moura, Carlos Vinicius,
Serge,
and
Serge Aurier, he's
yes,
gotten rid of.
Serge Aurier,
Musa
Sissoko,
Sissoko,
and,
Lacelso. Oh, I
and
mean, it's like
Dombele.
it's reached like it's gonna reach 20 players that
Yeah,
he's
like
had to get rid
it's
of.
it's
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 insane.
basically what he needs to do is a complete rebuild. And I'm not
It's almost
only
like he's
saying,
walked into a hoarder's house or something, Michael. And
yeah,
it's like just
exactly,
all
right.
the players. He's like just like, oh well, what are you doing with this Serge Aurier? Get it out of here. Like, and
Get
I
it
think
out, like,
I
yeah,
think
like,
it's reached that stage where he's like walking into a hoarding like of players that are just all useless. And he's just like, geez, like I need to bring in players, but this is so much I have to get rid of as well.
yeah. I think we had a syndrome of a grossly unsupported squad, like which needed refreshing a few years ago, right? And what was being done by the previous director of football and management was, instead of like doing the cleanup, they were just patching things up. And
Mm, yeah.
all those patches are falling off right now. And not only we need to do a cleanup, but we also need to get rid of the patches, right?
Mm,
So I think that yeah, it's really tough. I think there is still, like, in the squad currently, there is still like 6 players, maybe. I don't really want to count, but I think it's around 6 to 7 players that he needs to get rid of from this current
immediately.
squad. And he
Yeah.
also needs to get rid of all the players that are on loans currently,
Mhm.
right? So that's like 12 names to get rid of. And he
On
needs
top of
to
the players
bring,
you already mentioned,
yeah,
he's already gotten rid of, or
yeah,
at least is.
on top of the players that he already got rid of, right? So I think that there is a massive job ahead of him. And I think there is some truth to that, what we have written on the screen, right? That it takes time
Harder
to
to
get
cook.
rid of, yeah,
Yeah.
it takes time to get rid of those players, right? But I think that I have a clever anecdote here. And if you ever watched MasterChef,
Uh-huh.
usually when the contestants are cooking, the jury always says that you to be a good cook, you need to keep your place clean. You know that
Mm.
well, after whichever
Keep your
part of the
station
course,
clean. Yeah.
after whichever part of the course you create you cook, you have
Mm,
to do the cleaning before you start the next one. And I think that's what's happening right now. I think that he has to cook and clean at the same time because that's what good chefs do.
you're
They
so
keep their
brilliant.
place clean.
You're so right.
And
You're so right.
yeah,
You actually put a light bulb, for me here because where the last debate show on Tuesday, we were discussing like what Paratici and Levy need to be basically focused on the most during this World Cup. Is it getting rid of these deadwood players that we're speaking about right now? Is it investing in the squad in January? Is it Conte's contract? I think all answers are correct. I sort of was leaning towards the Deadwood players first because we saw the impact it had last season. Getting
yeah,
rid
when
of
we got rid of
all those players that were bad influences in the squad that Conte didn't want anymore, that he knew were distracting from what the team was trying to achieve that season, it did wonders for us. And I don't think people truly realize how much it actually did for us getting rid of so many of those guys. And I think we find ourselves in a situation again in January where would I take one less signing if that means getting rid of Sanchez and Tanganga? Perhaps yes. And
yeah,
I think that's where I
like
find myself
uh,
again, where I'm almost finding the cleaning to be just as important
important
as the
as yeah.
cooking. Yeah.
And also, coming back to the argument that I gave at the beginning of the question we are discussing, right? I think that it's easier to clean where you actually have some cleaning products to do that, right? That because let's imagine that we were owned by Todd Bowley, for example, right?
Hmm.
And that he had a lot of cash to waste, and he didn't really care about like losses or
Yeah.
about losing cash, right? I
Yeah.
think his job would be much easier because he would just look at Sanchez, find a club that wants him for whatever cash they can give you, like 5 million, 10
Right.
million, whatever it
Right.
is, right? And he would just move them on. And I think the problem with our club is that we have like unrealistic price tags slapped on those players. And like Libby wants, I don't know, 20 million for wings. Nobody's going to give you that. And
Yeah.
so it's either Paratici to convince Levy to actually
True.
give up and tell
True.
him that you need to do a cleanup. It's
It's not
obvious and
gonna be easy, and
necessary,
it's
right?
not gonna be yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not going to be easy. And but I believe that he will do that. I think that he's way already done a lot of good work in terms of cleaning up. I
Yeah.
am so happy that some players are gone from the squad, or even no doubt, but they aren't here. They aren't polluting the mentality of the squad,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that there just needs to be like a couple more players moved on, backups and replacements brought in, and I think that we will be sound.
Yeah, yeah. Let the Paratici cook, and we have to remember he has a lot of cleaning to do. Last topic here, Michael. Sort of connected, anyways. Dan Kilpatrick of the Evening Standard has said upgrades at wingback and center half and an understudy for Kulusevski are next on the Tottenham Hotspur shopping list. If you were to look at that shopping list right there, Michael, with maybe what we just said, I mean, I think Paratici has to get rid of a center back in order to bring in a center back. So he's going to have to get rid of Sanchez and or Tanganga. In order to bring in a wing back, he's going to have to get rid of Emerson or get rid of Doherty or Spence as well. So
Yeah,
again, it's not easy. But is this shopping list okay for you? I think it's makes sense. Personally, I would probably prioritize just bringing in 2 center backs and a wing back. I think that's what we really truly need utmost, but if you were to maybe sort of balance things out, this does maybe make sense. Bring in a better right wing back, bring in a center half that compete with Eric Dyer, and then also bring in somebody that can fill in for Kulusevski in case we find ourselves in a situation again where he's hurt and we are sort of devoid of creativity.
yeah. I think like it's in my opinion it's unrealistic to expect 5 or 6 signings in the winter.
Mhm.
That's simply not going to happen in my opinion. That like no
Doesn't really
clubs do
happen
that
anywhere.
that
Yeah.
sort of business, right?
Yeah.
And even if it was to happen, I think that the names that would come wouldn't be satisfactory for our fan base. So I think that those 3 positions need upgrading or filling, in my opinion. And I also think that with the squad size that we have currently, we kind of have to get rid of some players to bring other players in, because as far as I remember, it's 25 players that can be registered for any competition, right?
True.
So if you brought for just to use as an example, right? If you brought Malanowski in, then you want to register him, then you would have to unregister one of the players that is currently at the
You'd
squad, right?
unregister a Brian Hill or
Yeah, so
unregister
you
someone
would
else. Yeah.
probably need to, unregister Brian Hill. But then Brian Hill probably would not want to agree to this. He would say that I want some, at least a
He would
chance
wanna
to
be
have.
moved on then. He would
Yeah,
wanna
yeah, yeah.
guarantee that he gets a move somewhere. You're right. It's delicate. It's complicated. Yeah.
So I think what our club will try to do this winter is move Spence on loan, move
Mhm.
Hill on loan, and
Mhm.
try to sell one of the center backs. And I think like the biggest rumor out there is Sanchez.
And Tanganga might be
Yeah,
sold potentially.
and
Yeah.
Tanganga. I think the only issue with Tanganga is that the club that was most interested in him was AC Milan, and we
Right.
are playing them. Yeah, and we are playing them in the Champions League. So I doubt that they would want to sell one of our players to our to our rival,
Knowing,
because
yeah.
like he brings all the training regimes and all the tactics and whatever, right? So I think that it will be one of the center backs, one right wing back, one forward that will move on, and I think that will bring players in for them. So
Mm.
I think I agree with the Kilpatrick's list. I think those will be the three
Is
positions we will
is
try to
Malinowski
upgrade.
underwhelming for you? Some people think it's really underwhelming. Here's where I find it is that Kulusevski, the way he is playing of recent, and I think the way he'll probably continue to play, it won't be too long till people, will unanimously be calling him world class, I think. Right.
Yeah,
So you can't really upgrade on Kulusevski. In fact, you'd be stupid to try to upgrade on Kulusevski. What you really need is someone that's willing to play underneath him. You have to
yeah,
make that clear. You're playing underneath him, but he needs to also just still be a quality player. Just still needs to be a guy that can create for himself, be able to do things with some bit of quality. I actually think Malinowski fits that bill from what I've seen. He's a guy that's been there. He's been around at Serie A. In fact, if you actually look at his goals and assist ratio per 90, it's actually quite impressive. I know he plays for Atalanta, which is everybody's favorite hipster scoring team, but it doesn't matter. Like, he has some pretty good goal and assist ratio, I think, per 90. He hasn't been playing too much of recent. I think that's because he's moving to
yeah,
Tottenham and has always made it quite clear that he wants to leave Atalanta this season. So that's why he hasn't been playing, is because he made it quite clear he doesn't want to play there anymore. And on top of that, he actually would be a really good set piece threat for us. The guy
yeah,
is an absolute rocket of a left foot. And instead of watching it, Harry Kane continue to pelt it into the wall
yeah,
or
into
pelt
the
it into
wall.
the stands, I'd much rather watch Malinowski stand behind a free kick, because believe me, that wall will be terrified of what he can do, because he can hit it with some venom. He can also hit it and place it a lot better. I actually think he'd probably take Sonny off free kicks. He's that much better. I think too, probably Malinowski. I actually think sort of makes sense to me. When it comes to center backs, I don't see Bastoni coming in for me,
No
Michael. It's
chance,
too
no
big of
chance for
a
me.
it's too big of a transfer, and it's too big of a name to move in January. That's another thing, right? Is that it's hard to bring in big name players in January unless they need to be moved on, unless they're like a Ronaldo where they
Yeah,
come
like
out and they
uh,
want to be moved on. And big name players like even Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, no way
no
Milinkovic-Savic
way he's
is
moving
moving in
in,
January. Too big of a
unless
name. Yeah.
Lazio receive an offer that is basically like they have to accept it, right?
Yeah.
Unless like Liverpool comes or whoever,
Unless
right,
someone
and
comes in with
slap
like
a hundred
130
million,
million, yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah, or
then that
100,
then they'll
30
take
and
it.
100 million, then I think they will take it, right? But also to support what you said about Bastoni, I agree. For me, this ship has sailed, even though that pains me to say it because I think that he is a quality player. There are two reasons for me that the ship has sailed, and especially for this winter. First thing is that he is an Inter boy, right? He
Right.
got brought through their academy. At least I think so.
I think he
But
was at
he,
Atalanta, and then he is an Inter
yeah,
fan, but
like
yeah,
he
yeah,
he has San Siro tattooed on his
yeah,
shin pads, right? On his
yeah.
shin, right? Like he is an Inter boy. That's first thing. And the second thing is that, as far as I remember, he signed a contract extension in the summer, right? So I think that he has something like 1.5 or 2 years left on his
Yeah,
contract.
I think it's
But
2024. Yeah, if
but
I'm
yeah,
not
but
mistaken.
his teammate Skriniar has half a year left on his contract. And Inter, in my opinion, has two choices here. They can either try to persuade Skriniar to sign an extension and either let him move in the summer,
Uh-huh.
but that's risky because Skriniar can point the middle finger at them and say, "I want to move now," right?
Mhm.
Or they can actually let him move in the winter, right? And because of his quality, it's not like because usually when players have short contracts, they go for cheap. But I think that he is so good that they actually can demand like 60 million or whatever, right, and still get
Right.
that money for him. So if you gave me a choice of bringing in like a 15 million forward and a 50 million center back, or a 50 million forward and a 15 million center back, I would much rather have a quality center back and a backup forward than the other way around. And I
Mhm.
think, as you said, Malanowski fits that profile perfectly. And also, what I want to point out is that I think that Conte's preferred formation is 3-4-3.
Me too.
And whereas uh, I love Madison, I think that he's such a quality player and also like massively underrated by
Right.
Southgate and
Yeah.
some fans of other clubs. I think that we if we wanted to play Madison, then we would probably have to not play Kulusevski because we need to change the formation to fit Madison in the middle,
I
right?
agree.
And I would much rather have Kulusevski on the right, Son, Kane, our front
Me
three,
too.
and Malanowski as a backup to Kulusevski. And
Mhm.
I think, as you said, he's 29. He comes from Atalanta. He also he only has half a year left on his contract, which means that we will get
Makes
him for
sense.
cheap.
Yeah.
So I think that this deal will be done, and I can just hope that we splash the cash in the back.
I hope we
But
splash it on the center back. Yeah,
yeah, I
that's
hope
where
we
it needs to
splash
be
it on.
splashed. It might be a Simicon also potentially. We're looking at Simicon.
I'm
That
okay
could
with that.
I'd be okay with that too. I actually think it wouldn't be a bad idea considering we really lack, apart from Romero, athletic center backs, I think, in some sense or form. I think Eric Dyer is exceptionally unathletic in some ways. And Sanchez is athletic, but doesn't have any sort of defensive skills really whatsoever. So
Yeah,
Simicon actually finds himself, I think, actually is a very athletic center back that also actually can defend, which is very ideal. Michael, I think we've reached the end of this podcast here. I've really enjoyed this discussion.
yeah, me too, me too.
Hopefully, we can get you on another one soon, and you can actually be alongside Davo. Maybe I'll go missing on that one, but really, I doubt it. I love these podcasts. But any kind of final words before we kind of end it off here?
Yeah, like my final words are probably back Conte. I am so in love with this man. I want him to succeed at our club, and also I think that judging by his comments, I think that he's looking for a club to settle. But the issue is our board and our owners whether they allow him to thrive
Hmm.
here, right? So I think if we as fans show an anonymous support for Conte, that we back him with all our hearts, I think that gives an incentive for the board to actually
I
offer him
agree.
a new contract, offer him support. So
Let's
I
show the
think
love
that
to
yeah,
Conte.
I think we should show love to Conte, but I'm also really glad that the break is here and I don't have to watch Spurs for a few weeks
Good man.
because it was
Good man.
getting tiring. So yeah.
Well, best of luck to Polska in the World Cup.
Oh Jesus, don't
Uh,
remind me about the World Cup.
but everybody, I think we'll end it off here on the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button on your way out. Leave a
Smash
comment
the
below
like,
if you
guys.
enjoyed. Show Michael some support, especially if you enjoyed what he had to say. But we will be seeing ya. Come on, you Spurs, and in Conte we trust.
Come on, you Spurs.